Rise and shine, Fox Nation. Judge Andrew Napolitano here, and you are watching Liberty File, where we monitor the government as it infringes upon your personal liberty. Rise and shine, Fox Nation. Judge Andrew Napolitano here, and you are watching Liberty File, where we monitor the government as it infringes upon your personal liberty, takes your private property, and interferes with your economic opportunities. It seems that every time there is a tragedy perpetrated by a thug with a gun, a mass murder committed with a gun anywhere in the world, the gun control crowd in the United States wants to take guns away or substantially impede them from their use by ordinary law-abiding folks. In New Jersey, for example, the legislature just arbitrarily restricted the size of the device that holds bullets, called the magazine, to 10 rounds. By doing that, it effectively made illegal what was lawful for many years and told folks to destroy the magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. That's the state telling you to destroy your own private property, which you purchased and acquired lawfully. That constitutes, if followed, a taking of property without just compensation, in direct violation of the Constitution, to say nothing about its interference with your ability to defend yourself. On the federal level, President Trump, on his own and without legislation, just by signing a piece of paper, made bump stocks illegal, assuming that the thugs will comply. This also, of course, constitutes a taking without compensation. The history and the theory of the Second Amendment is that all persons have the natural right to self-defense, using the same means as those who would attack us, whether the attackers are crazed civilians or government agents. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. Today's topic: how to persuade the government to keep its hands off our guns. Let's get started. Joining me now to discuss is president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, and probably the foremost authority on gun rights in the United States from an academic, legal, and theoretical perspective, John Lott. John, a pleasure. Welcome here.
Great to be here. Thanks.
What could people like me and people in New Jersey do when an item that you own lawfully, have used to safely, have acquired lawfully with the government's knowledge, suddenly becomes illegal?
Well, I mean, I guess you can hope the courts will protect you at some point along the line. I mean, as you say, it's pretty arbitrary where they draw the line on that. And it's something that's very commonly owned, which is one of the points that Scalia brought up in the Heller case that was there.
The legislator who actually wrote this legislation was from Essex County, which is where the city of Newark is located. And one of the legislators who's from the area where I live, which is a rural area, asked her if she had ever held a handgun in her life. No,
Right.
She hadn't. Where did the 10 come from? Because it limits the magazine. If
Sure.
your magazine holds more than 10 rounds, it's illegal.
Right.
Even if you only put 10 in it, just the use of this thing and
Yeah.
its possession is illegal. She couldn't answer where 10 came from.
Right.
Well, that's the number they use in California. Well, that's ridiculous.
Right. No. The thing is, you have to believe these people don't know very much about guns. I mean, the magazine is an incredibly simple part of the gun to make. It's a box with a spring in it. I've seen people put together magazines in 2 minutes.
Right.
Just folding pieces of metal after it was cut out by a stamp. And the notion that somehow you're going to be able to prevent criminals from getting those types of devices just isn't serious. I mean, the people who are going to obey this are going to be the law-abiding citizens. If you're a concealed carry permit holder, you don't carry extra magazines with you. You carry the one that's going to be in your gun. And so if you limit it to 10 rounds, that's how many rounds the civilian's going to have. But if somebody's going to go and do a mass public shooting, the notion that they're going to say, well, I can only have one magazine here and it's limited to 10 just isn't serious. Either they're going to get a larger magazine or multiple, or they're going to carry multiple magazines with them when they go and do the attack.
Yeah. What is the best argument against the mania of the gun control crowd who want to stop people like you and me and a lot of people watching us now who are trained in the use of handguns and lawfully own them? They want to impede our ability to defend ourselves. They must know that the
Right.
crazy people, as you just articulated, couldn't give a damn about the law.
Look, I suppose the easiest empirical point I would make to them is that lots of places around the world have tried to ban guns, not just Chicago and Washington, D.C. And every single time that either all guns have been banned or all handguns, murder rates have gone up, and usually by large amounts.
Because people can't defend themselves.
Right. I mean, the question is, you may make it a little bit more difficult for criminals to have guns, but if you're primarily disarming law-abiding good citizens relative to the criminals, you actually make it easier for the criminals to go and commit crimes. I mean, you think out of randomness, one time they could point to a place where murder rates have even stayed the same, let alone fall.
And they can't.
And they can't even point to one case.
One of the latest ways to interfere with the right to keep and bear arms is the so-called red flag laws, which would permit a relative, a friend, an acquaintance to go to the police or go to a judge without even notice to you. There isn't even a due process, and say, so-and-so has been angry lately. So-and-so last week slapped his or her spouse, and so-and-so has lawful guns. We think you should take them away. And in these states where these laws exist, they haven't been challenged yet, and I think they're going to fall when they are challenged. The police come and take the guns.
Right.
I mean, this is authoritarian.
But there are already laws on the books, the so-called Baker Acts that you see in the states, where if you're concerned that somebody is unstable in some way, that they're a danger to themselves or others, you can go get a 72-hour hold on them and have them psychologically evaluated. But, these laws, these red flag laws, I'd compare them to like the Minority Report movie for Tom Cruise, where we're trying to predict whether somebody's going to commit a crime. At least Tom Cruise had psychics helping him in that movie. In this case, it's just guesses, and it's very low standards. I mean, you know the different standards, but one is a reasonableness test. It's just a little bit more than a hunch. Maybe talking about 15, 20% probability. Some of them may have probable cause, but that's still a very low standard that's there. And when you go and you talk to people, I was temporarily on a Uniform Law Commission to go and look at different states. We were talking about setting up a model red flag law. And you go and talk to people that have these laws and say, well, what do you look for then? Because they leave these rules very vague.
Right.
It's kind of, if you know it when you see it type of thing.
Yeah, but the laws were written by fiercely anti-gun people, and they were written for that purpose. They're not concerned with public safety. They're concerned with public disarming, because these people honestly believe, and no cop in the country would tell you this, that the police can keep us safe. The police arrive afterwards.
Right. Well, I mean, you look at surveys of police, and police, even though my research indicates police are probably the single most important factor for reducing crime, the police themselves understand, as you say, they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred. And that raises the question, what should somebody do when they're confronting a criminal by themselves? Police are probably the strongest supporters, if you look at surveys, of private ownership of guns.
Right where you're sitting sat in the past 2 months 2 former New York City police commissioners, Bernie Kerik and Ray Kelly, and they both effectively said the same thing. In this city where we're located, where it is nearly impossible to get a permit to carry a concealed weapon, they both said to me, nothing would help us more than a trained, armed citizenry legally carrying handguns. Former heads of the New York City Police Department.
Right.
I don't know if they would have said that while they were running the police department, because the mayors for whom they worked would have, and who appointed them, disagreed. But they were clearly articulating that from the chair where you know.
Well, you look at surveys of police nationally, Police One, which is the largest private organization of police with about 450,000 members.
Right.
Their survey indicated that 76% of police thought that private ownership of guns was either extremely important or very important in reducing crime.
What is the future, in your opinion, of the right to keep and bear arms? If I had asked you that 30 or 40 years ago, you would have said bleak, but it might be a little better now with the makeup of the Supreme Court, with the Scalia-written Heller decision, and then its follow-up, McDonald. Those things are, of course, limited to the home and to the property immediately around the home.
Right. Well, support for gun control peaked in 1998. and then it's fallen until about 2014 and was flat for a few years, and now it's started to go back up again a little bit. It's still not anywhere near as high as it was in '98. But I agree with you. I think Gorsuch and Kavanaugh's appointments to the Supreme Court have made a huge difference in terms of the debate. It's still a question with Roberts exactly how far they're going to be able to go on those things. But, you know, you look at different laws. New Jersey is going to be increasing the cost of getting a concealed carry permit, you know, the license to be able to buy a gun, the permit to buy a gun, and then you have to have a permit to carry a gun.
Right.
Right now, the cost for those things in New Jersey is $27. The government wants to increase the total cost for 2 years to $550. I mean, that's a real cost.
Yeah.
And the question, and I think one of the systematic things that's been going on in the gun control movement is to make it costly in different ways, particularly for poor minorities.
Isn't
to be
that
able to
a material interference with a fundamental liberty when the government makes it too expensive for you to exercise that liberty?
Look, there's Supreme Court precedent on the First Amendment that says that if you were to impose a 1 penny tax on newspapers, that would be unconstitutional. The courts would throw that out. Now you can
Right.
put a sales tax on everything, but if you specifically put a tax, just even a penny, just on newspapers, it wouldn't last a minute. Well, here you have talking about not a penny. You're talking about
$500.
right, huge amounts of money. And I would imagine that under the right circumstances, that could be challenged. Look, there's so many costs. You know, people want to have background checks, and they push these universal background checks, these background checks on private transfers. In New York City, it costs there's one gun store that will do it for $125. Others will do it for $175, $200 to do the transfer. But that's only part of the cost. What people don't realize is we frequently hear that there are 3.5 million dangerous, prohibited people who've been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. That's simply false. What they should say is there have been 3.5 million initial denials, and almost all of those, something around 99% of those, are mistakes.
Wow.
It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they've named similar to a felon from buying a gun. And this primarily affects poor minorities.
Right.
When you buy a gun, you fill out the 4473, the form, you put your name, your social security number, your race, your address,
And
your
they,
birthday.
and they still botch it.
But the thing is, they don't use all that information. They use roughly phonetically similar names
Wow.
and similar birthdays. And the thing is, people have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics have names similar to other Hispanics. Blacks have names similar to other blacks. 30% of black males are legally prohibited from owning a gun because of past criminal history. Whose names do you think their names are most likely to be confused with? Other law-abiding, good black males who want to buy a gun to protect themselves. Now, you can challenge it,
Got it.
but most people have to hire a lawyer, and you're talking about $3,000 to $10,000 to do it. Who do they think are stopped from buying a gun?
John Lott, you're shoveling against the tide, but keep doing it. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for
Well,
joining.
thanks.
That's it for this edition of Liberty File. You can catch me here Monday through Thursday at 9:30 in the morning Eastern and on demand anytime. And remember, Fox Nation isn't my nation, it's your nation. We want to hear from you. What stories do you want us to cover? Whose insight are you interested in? Who are you sick and tired of? What has the government done to you lately? Email us at libertyfile@foxnews.com. Today's quote from Thomas Jefferson. This is a doozy. The strongest reason for people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is, as a last resort, to protect themselves against tyranny and the government. From New York, protecting against tyranny and the government and defending freedom every day of the week. So long, America.